presentation. My name is John and I will be your host. Today we're going to be talking about dealing with resentment. And this is something that a lot of people seem to battle with, and it seems pretty prevalent when you look at people's general behavior and reactions. And what I mean by that is things like road rage and air rage and violent crime. A lot of people seem to be dealing with a lot of anger, a lot of frustration, a lot of negative emotions projected and directed at people, at others, in relationships or just in society at large. And we're going to look at today what resentment is. We're going to look at what resentment does. And we're also going to look at how we can deal with resentment. It is really important to understand that resentment is something that really robs us of peace of mind, of a positive quality of life. And if we can figure out some of the root causes for some of the resentment, anger, frustration that we may be feeling, it will be a very helpful tool in helping us to experience a greater sense of well-being. Before we start, just two points I would like to make. The first one is I will be using a comprehensive PowerPoint presentation, and the reason being that the majority of people learn visually. It is important that they both hear and see the presentation. And secondly, should you discover some questions coming up during the presentation, please feel free to direct these questions to me and I will endeavor to reply to them. I will provide you with my contact details at the end of the presentation. We're going to look at a definition of resentment as per Merriam-Webster. Resentment is a feeling of indignant displeasure or persistent ill will at something regarded as a wrong, insult, or injury. So it is a negative reaction towards a situation that I perceive in a negative way. And I just want to make it clear right from the beginning that there is no situation, there is no event, there is no circumstance, there is no person that can within themselves cause any emotion inside of me. My emotions are always the result of a meaning-making and feeling-making process that takes place internally. In other words, I evaluate a situation, I give it a certain meaning, and my nervous system responds accordingly by releasing a whole range of chemicals that will either make me feel positive or feel negative. So this indignant displeasure that I experience is because I've labeled something as negative, I've given it a negative meaning, and I experience the related emotion. Now, by no means am I downplaying or minimizing any potential negative event, but it's just important to understand that I experience a situation according to the meaning that I give it. So in that sense, I actually create the feelings of resentment within myself. Let's look at what psychology today says about what resentment is. Resentment, also called ranklement or bitterness. In other words, it's as I intimated earlier on, a very strong negative emotion that I'm experiencing, is a complex, multi-layered emotion that has been described as a mixture of disappointment, disgust, anger, and fear. So it's a mixture of different kinds of emotions that I experience in response to an unacceptable situation. Disappointment could create feelings of sadness, disgust, feelings of resistance, anger, and then fear, insecurity. And the reason being that for the most part, when I experience resentment, it is because of a situation that I feel very little control over, and that as a result trigger feelings of helplessness sometimes, feelings of violation, of imposition, and that creates the feelings of resentment. Some psychologists consider it a mood or as a secondary emotion, including cognitive elements that can be elicited in the face of insult or injury. And secondary emotion meaning that the emotion of resentment very often can mask other feelings or other emotions that I may be less willing to face, and we will look at some examples a bit further down the line. And it also includes cognitive elements, in other words, ways of thinking, beliefs are triggered, all that kind of thing. And it's because of facing insult or injury, something, in other words, as I said earlier on, that I have a level of lack of control over. Resentment is an indication of a sense of violation or imposition, such an important principle to understand. I feel resentment when I feel something is being forced onto me. I feel that my ability to make my own choices, make my own decisions have been taken away from me. Something is being imposed onto me that I don't want to experience. My sense of self-determination has been impaired. And that feeling of impaired control, making me feel helpless, those are all the elements that contribute towards me experiencing feelings of resentment. The primary underlying emotion for resentment is anger. Very, very important principle again. When I experience something that makes me feel angry, and I experience a sense of little or no control over it, I experience a sense of something being forced onto me, and there is little or nothing that I can do to change the situation. That is what evokes the feelings of resentment. We're going to look at anger itself, and anger very often serves several defensive purposes. It shields me from uncomfortable primary emotions, and by that meaning maybe feelings of sadness or feelings of insecurity that I may not want to face up to. It may be easier to act out in anger than to face the underlying emotions. It provides a sense of power and control, and especially if I feel a lack of control over or towards a situation, the feelings of anger may remedy that for me. And I feel a bit more in control because of the anger and the resentment, because it is directed at the situation. It directs focus outwards to identifiable external scapegoats. In other words, there is something that I can focus onto, there's something I can project onto, there's something I can point to. And that sort of becomes more justifiable for me. There's something I can blame. But we're going to look at how negative that kind of mindset actually is, and the negative impact it can have on my life. A sense of violation or imposition is usually a sign of a lack of clearly defined boundaries. And what I mean by that is, as I mentioned, anger very often is the result of a feeling of violation, imposition, something's been forced onto me, my sense of determination is being impaired or affected. And that very often is the result of a lack of clearly defined boundaries. Boundaries I've set for myself and boundaries I've set towards others. A boundary is simply me deciding what I will say yes to, what I will say no to, what I will allow myself to experience, and what I will not allow myself to experience on my turn. And that helps me to feel more secure, to feel protected, to feel more in control. And until I, first of all, establish the boundary, and secondly, communicate the boundary, that boundary does not exist. And sometimes you hear people talking about others violating the boundaries. Well, if that boundary hasn't been established and communicated, it doesn't exist, there is no boundary. And it's really important for me to figure out areas where I feel a sense of violation on an ongoing basis, where I feel a sense of imposition on an ongoing basis, and to realize that these are areas that I need to examine and explore where and how I can establish boundaries and communicate those boundaries. Very important point, a lack of boundaries invites a lack of respect, because people don't really know how far they can go with you. And some people may then see that as an opportunity to take advantage and to manipulate, and all because of a lack of boundaries, which is a major source of feelings of resentment. Resentment implies certain things. In other words, if I hold on to resentment, this is really what I am communicating and what I'm implying. And I remember when I first explored this during a time where I was experiencing a lot of resentment in my own life. And at the time I saw as justified, I realized the harm that I was actually causing myself by holding on to resentment. The first one, I punished myself for someone else's actions. If I hold on to anger and resentment and unforgiveness towards somebody who may have caused me harm, I am the one that is actually suffering from the resentment and the unforgiveness, and we're going to explore how that works. So I continue to punish myself for something somebody else did. I also keep experiencing the pain of something that may not be happening anymore because I keep replaying it in my mind. I keep revisiting what happened. I keep repeating the same negative narrative in my head. I keep experiencing the resentment and anger and unforgiveness towards the person. So I keep experiencing and creating more and more pain of something that may no longer be happening. It also puts someone else in charge of my emotions, because every time I think of that person, I feel anger, I feel sadness, I feel hurt, I feel rejection. So that person, or that situation for that matter, is now in charge of my emotions, decides for me how I feel because I choose to hold on to resentment. Another very interesting principle is it creates the risk of me repeating the offense to someone else. And you often see this where children grow up with resentment towards their parents, maybe towards the parents' parenting styles or the way that the parent may have treated the child. And very often that person will repeat the same patterns in their own families towards their own children, and create the same experiences for themselves. And I experienced that firsthand by my own life, holding on to unresolved anger and resentment towards my parents, and I found myself repeating the exact same patterns with in my own family. So it's really important to understand that. It also robs me of taking personal responsibility, and the reason being I continue to project, I continue to focus onto someone else, I continue to blame, so I never have the opportunity to address whatever the situation is that may have contributed towards causing it within me. So therefore, I don't take any personal responsibility, and I rob myself of an opportunity for growth, for change. And what do I mean by responsibility? Simply facing up, owning up, and showing up. That is what responsibility is all about. I may not be responsible for things that happened in my life, particularly during childhood, but the fact that those situations took place and the fact that those things are in my life right now makes it my responsibility. What am I going to do about it? I'm going to own up, I'm going to face up, and I'm going to show up in my own life and take responsibility to make the necessary changes that I need to make in order to create a different experience for myself in my life. A very interesting fact, resentment is a form of manipulation, very subtle, very insidious. And what it means is that with me holding on to resentment, holding on to anger, holding on to unforgiveness, at some level I want to punish the other person. And what that is all about is I want to force the other person to change or to do certain things my way, because I resist their behavior towards me, their attitude towards me. I reject what they did. I still hold on to the negative emotions that result, and my resentment could be an unconscious, subtle, insidious way of me trying to force them to change. So that is a very, very major form of manipulation. And of course, the chances of me bringing about the necessary change that I want to experience by holding on to resentment and manipulating, those chances are very slim. So it is just going to leave me more disillusioned, disgruntled, and frustrated. I want to look at something that is referred to as the drama triangle very briefly, or the Stephen Carpenter triangle. And this is a triangle that basically explains dysfunctional relationships between people, where there is a lot of anger, a lot of manipulation, a lot of denial, and the three roles that very often show up within this kind of relationship triangle. Firstly, there is the victim. This is someone who disparages themselves. They feel helpless and hopeless. They feel rejected. They complain. They manipulate. And the attitude is, I can't do it on my own. Poor me. And they avoid responsibility in order to feel inferior. And this is a person that feels sorry for him or herself and wants everybody else to fix them, or is looking for someone else to blame for where they are at. No personal responsibility. Where there is a victim, there is a persecutor. And this is someone who asparages other people's worth. They criticize, they judge, they hurt others. It's all your fault. You can't do anything right. And they have a sense of superiority. And where there is a victim and a persecutor, there very often is a rescuer. And this is someone who disparages other people's skills. In other words, they see other people as weak, and they feel the need to take care of them, and they take care of other people without being asked. And the attitude is, let me help you. You can't do it on your own. And when they help others, it makes them feel superior. What drives the dysfunctional behavior in all three of these roles? Denial. Denial is the opposite of responsibility, where I don't own up, I don't face up, I don't show up. I rationalize, I justify, I minimize, I give myself permission to continue what I'm doing. And underneath all that is the manipulation, the insidious ways in which I try to control others and force others to meet my needs and to play the roles that I want them to play in order to make me feel more in control. And very often resentment is also a major driving force. The victim feels resentment towards others who are hurting them, or towards others who are not helping them. The persecutor feels resentment towards the weaklings, and they feel resentment towards the rescuers, always interfering in other people's lives. And the rescuer may feel resentment towards the persecutor, causing other people pain, and sometimes also towards the victim if the victim won't allow them to fulfill that role of rescuer. So it's a very codependent cycle that is created. And this is just one example of what resentment, unforgiveness, bitterness, anger towards others can lead to, and how it can rob each person of their own responsibility to bring about the change, and could create this role. Now, this could be played by three people, it could be played by one person, it could be played by two persons, and people can go back and forth between these roles as long as they remain in the place of denial and the place of manipulation. And until I take personal responsibility for wherever I maybe am in this particular triangle, nothing is going to change. And the chances are greater for me to continue in my feelings of resentment, anger, bitterness, and unforgiveness. Resentment makes me a voluntary victim. Remember, we said earlier that resentment causes other people to remain in control of my emotions. I punish myself for other people's actions. I continue to experience what may no longer be happening. And that causes me to blame, to project, to point fingers at others, either for causing me pain or not helping me. So, hello, my name is victim. I'm a voluntary victim. I choose to do this because it is a form of manipulation. There is some kind of payoff. There is some kind of reward that I'm getting out of it. There is some level of feeling in control. And of course, this all comes from a place of total helplessness and helplessness, feeling completely out of control, feeling I have no sense of self-determination, no ability to make my own choices and decisions, a place of utmost insecurity. And that is what holding on to resentment ultimately causes me to be and experience. There are very harmful effects of resentment or anger or bitterness or unforgiveness. Resentment produces stress that can have a negative impact on my physical and mental health. And what is stress? The essence of stress is I am thinking very negative, unresourceful, self-sabotaging thoughts about a situation, about a circumstance, thoughts of helplessness, thoughts of anger, thoughts of frustration, thoughts of being out of control. And those thoughts trigger the release of a whole range of stress hormones within my nervous system that creates the feelings inside of me of anger, frustration, and helplessness. And that can ultimately, over a period of time, have negative impact on my physical health, in that the stress hormones within my body have a direct impact on cellular function and organ function within my body that can ultimately affect the homeostasis in my body, and that can ultimately affect my body's autoimmune system, and that can ultimately contribute towards physical health challenges. It can also cause an imbalance in neurochemicals in my brain that can affect neural functioning, and that can ultimately contribute towards mental health issues. And all because I'm holding on to negative feelings and negative stories, blaming, pointing fingers at others. And in that whole process, what I'm doing is I am continuing to punish myself. I'm continuing to cause negative experiences and ultimately jeopardize my physical and mental health, all because I make the choice of playing victim and holding on to reasons and justifications to blame others for where I am in my life.
Have you ever been unexpectedly broken up with, unfairly fired, or maliciously targeted? The hurt you felt may have taken on a life of its own, turning into an obsessive hatred, suffering, and desire for revenge that consumed all other aspects of your life. How can resentment spiral out of control and completely devour us? And how do we stop it from doing so? Hi, I'm Peter Montoya from Thrive Union, and I'll be sharing our current thinking on breaking the cycle of resentment, why it's so important, and how forgiveness frees us. Resentment is the bitter indignation or anger for a perceived injustice, insult, or mistreatment. It's a constant reminder to harm others because they harmed us. Resentment is unmanifested revenge. If left unchecked, resentment becomes a festering wound that worsens over time. Writer and politician Malaki McCourt wrote, "Resentment is like taking poison and waiting for the other person to die." However, resentment has a place. It's an evolutionary reminder to take revenge. Our ancestors survived the harsh conditions of ancient life by creating tight-knit communities. Betraying social cohesion not only threatened individuals, but it also threatened our species. To enforce social cohesion, our ancestors needed a weapon, like revenge, to keep people in line. Current research shows that for most people, revenge is used to send a message, to change behavior, and prevent further harm. It gets individuals to return to social norms so the group can thrive. However, revenge as enforcement can rip apart communities and relationships, destroying rather than connecting. Hence, communities that also learn to practice forgiveness and let go of resentment survive much better than those who only used revenge. Another one of our videos looks at how boundaries help us avoid revenge. For now, it's enough to know that taking revenge and granting forgiveness both clear the feeling of resentment, but forgiveness has more personal benefits. The Mayo Clinic reports that forgiveness creates healthier relationships, improves mental health, and lowers anxiety, stress, and hostility. Other studies show it lowers blood pressure, helps depression, boosts the immune system, and improves self-esteem. It clears toxic resentment without destroying others or ourselves. So how do we forgive? For that, we'll turn to clinical psychologist Everett Worthington's REACH model. First, recall the hurt. Don't suppress your emotions, but decide you want to forgive to clear resentment from your life. Second, empathize with the person who wronged you. Imagine them sitting in a chair next to you. You can first pour out your heart to them, but imagine them explaining themselves. Try to get in their head and their heart. Empathize. Third, give an altruistic gift of forgiveness. Recall times when you were forgiven. Then decide you'll give the same gift to your offender. Fourth, commit. Write out a declaration of forgiveness, such as, "Today, I forgave so-and-so for hurting me." Fifth, hold on to forgiveness. Forgiveness is a process. Don't self-shame if it takes time. Review your commitment declaration and consider what you'll gain by forgiving. To end resentment in relationships, stop trying to win. Therapist Jeffrey Rubin told one couple, "Be more interested in understanding your spouse or the person who offended you than in winning. Otherwise, reconciliation will take longer than it needs to, and you'll both lose." Guaranteed. Compassionate, empathetic listening fosters understanding and forgiveness, while winning arguments only increases resentment. Licensed clinical social worker Terry Gaspard wrote, "I've come to realize is that forgiveness is more of a perspective and a practice. It lets go of your old baggage so you can heal and move on with your life. It's about giving yourself and your loved ones the kind of future you and they deserve, unhampered by hurt and recycled anger. It simply means that you are unwilling to give others power over you. Forgiveness breaks the cycle of resentment, freeing us to live the lives we were meant to. So the next time you're severely hurt by a breakup, firing, or social slight, rather than swallowing a handful of poison pills, choose to practice forgiveness and let go of resentment so you can thrive."
Forgiveness, the F word that so many people have a problem with. And I really believe the reason why so many people have a problem with forgiveness is because of the misunderstanding around what forgiveness is. And to me, the basic essence of forgiveness is I choose to release that which is causing me pain. As simple as that. So let's look at some of the benefits of forgiveness, because we've looked at what resentment can cause us, and I think any right-thinking person will realize that the only person who really suffers as a result of my resentment is me. And I am the only one that can bring about the necessary change by choosing to let go of that which has been hurting me. Forgiveness releases me. Releases me of what? Releases me of the anger, releases me of the feelings of resentment, releases me of the impact of stress hormones, the ravaging impact of stress hormones on my body. And all it is I start to think differently. It puts me in control of my own life. I no longer blame others for the way that I feel. I no longer put other people in control of my emotions. I take back control, so I feed my own sense of self-determination. It improves self-worth because it makes me feel better. It makes me feel stronger. It makes me feel a greater sense of control of my own life. It is a sign of personal power. In other words, it is something that I am willing to do very often in the face of maybe very, very good reasons I could give myself to blame somebody else, but I make the decision, I make the choice to go beyond that. And that is a sign of strength, of personal power. It also improves my physical and mental health because it has a direct impact on the biochemical and bioelectrical processes in my brain and body that can have a major impact on improving physical and mental health. Forgiveness is almost a selfish act because of its immense benefits to the one who forgives. I love this quote. It is selfish as in I put myself first. I practice self-care. I realize what I've been doing to myself, and I realize that I owe it to myself to do something different. What forgiveness is not. As I said, some people have very negative views on forgiveness and they may see it as a sign of weakness. What forgiveness is not letting the offender off the hook. I am not condoning what the person did. I'm not minimizing what they did. All as forgiveness does is I let go of that person and the action so that I can start to feel better. And very often I am allowing God, the universe, whatever you want to call it, to be able to deal with that person and that person to learn their own lessons. One of the things I learned earlier on in my journey of learning forgiveness was that as long as I hold on to resentment, I'm actually interfering with that person's journey of growth and learning for themselves, and where they can learn to take personal responsibility. So it's really important that it's not a matter of letting anybody off the hook. It is not denying what happened. It's not a matter that I'm putting my head in the sand. I still acknowledge what happened. I still allow myself to feel what it is. I'm honest about it, but I realize that holding on to it is not going to change anything. It's not even remaining friends with the offender. I could let go of that relationship. I never have to see the person again if the reasons may warrant that. All that it means is I can let go of the person, and in the process, I can also let go of the feelings of anger and resentment, and I can move on with my own life. It is not a sign of weakness. It is quite the opposite. It is a sign of tremendous inner strength, because it takes a decision. And as I said, sometimes in the face of overwhelming evidence to prove my feelings to be justified. So it is absolutely a sign of inner strength. Some basic tools how I can deal with resentment, and some of the principles came up in the video, so I'm just going to very briefly run through them again as a matter of reminding ourselves. Identify the payoff. What am I getting out of my resentment? Is it making me feel in control? Is it making me feel stronger? And of course, ultimately, we understand it will have the exact opposite effects. Practice identifying and allowing yourself to feel the underlying emotions. It's okay to feel anger. It's okay to feel sadness. It's okay to feel frustrated. But identify them as feelings, as emotions. They do not define who I am. Those are responses inside of me as the result of the way that I'm thinking about the situation. Identify how you may have contributed to the situation that you're angry or resentful about. Is there anything maybe that you did? Was there a lack of boundaries? And it's just a matter of me taking personal responsibility in order to avoid a repetition of a similar situation. Practice expressing anger and resentment differently. Find a way to express the anger through physical exercise or talking to somebody. And that will reduce the need to act out on it in feelings of anger and resentment. Learn to practice relaxation and self-calming techniques. Very powerful, because it helps me to relax. It helps me to release the feel-good chemical called serotonin that brings a sense of calmness. Deep breathing, it really helps me to be able to overcome resentment and move towards forgiveness. Learn to practice empathy, and that may be challenging. Empathy in the sense that people are human, people make mistakes, people mess up, people are inclined to hurt others because they feel hurt. And very often I may be carrying this resentment towards myself, unforgiveness towards myself. And the same principle, I am human, I make mistakes. And if I can experience those feelings of empathy, it makes it easy for me to release resentment. The weak can never forgive. Forgiveness is the attribute of the strong. It is not a sign of weakness. I've said that a few times. It is a sign of inner strength. It is a commitment that I make to myself to do something about the situation and no longer project, no longer point fingers. And it all boils down to the R word, responsibility. Personal responsibility. And the majority of people never get to the place in their life where they take personal responsibility. They face up to what is really going on. They own up to their role in it, and they show up in doing what needs to be done to bring about the change, as opposed to blaming others or waiting on others. And personal responsibility releases an amazing sense of freedom, an amazing sense of feeling more in control, because I take back my own power and I do what needs to be done. And I'm able to create a whole new experience for myself. Well, that is the end of our presentation. If you feel that you found any value in the presentation or you have any questions, please feel free to drop me a line at john.ttklife@gmail.com, and I would love to hear from you and to communicate with you. I wish you an amazing journey forward as you continue to grow and to develop, and as you continue to take more and more personal responsibility to create and design the life that you desire.